In terms of setting strategy, we already spoke about, finding, 1 to 3 key focus areas for your program. So really, I think the key thing here, strategy is the art of deciding what not to do. That goes really well because we've seen there can be so much you could be focusing on. So that is really important. Another key thing is that I think is establishing that ESG governance. That's really an important area. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Christine, like why that's so important and how you should think about that.
Right now, I talk to so many executives who call sustainability or ESG a hot potato in their company, and it seems there isn't, unless you have a chief sustainability officer, which you do have at larger enterprises. There isn't a single executive office that it lives within. Can be legal. I had it with legal. It can be finance. It can be strategy. Can kind of be all over the place. And unless you have a single executive that can get called on the carpet for not meeting those objectives, things won't really move forward. So there's a first level step of let's find an executive leader who is the point person in charge of it. Then there's a next level step of, in making sure that the entire executive team is bought into the idea that even though we have one executive responsible in charge of it, we're all responsible. So just like you have a CFO, that person is not responsible for making all the money and managing everything. They're just reporting on it. So you have to indoctrinate that. And then, the board is also critical. A lot of boards, are starting to ask for reporting on ESG issues, or starting to ask about materiality questions. And if your board isn't asking about that, then it's a good opportunity to bring it up and help them make sure that they are managing the material risks of the company in a way that aligns with their fiduciary duties.
I think that's a great point, the board there as well. Like what we see is it's really important to think about the board and think about your directors and are they ESG literate? Like how much do they know about ESG sustainability? Do they know how to ask the right questions? So you might have your executive team educated, you got that responsibility clear there, who's accountable, we're all responsible. You got in your company maybe a cross-functional ESG working group that is actually pulling the data, measuring it, collecting it, putting it all together. But then if the board can't actually kind of, properly govern and provide that oversight because they just don't know enough, they don't know what scope 1, 2, and 3 is around GHG emissions, that it's really important to make sure that you don't kind of forget the board, get them on board as well and educate them. So the board directors might sometimes, be a bit defensive around it if they realize they don't know something. So it's really important to work with that executive team and find a way in which you can understand what is that ESG literate level of my board and what can we give them without telling them you don't know anything about this. It's like, how can you upskill them in a bit of a strategic way where they are positioned in a way that they can ask the right questions, because that's really important. So we also spoke about, understanding what that pathway is for meeting compliance requirements. There's not a lot of compliance in the US at the moment, but there will be things. The Canadians are definitely implementing the ISSB standards. There are some things on the books for the US coming, but with that also keep in mind that the Europeans have legislation that is live, that European companies need to report on, but also any foreign companies, so US companies or Canadian companies that have links to the EU or have a subsidiary there. So really be careful as well that if it's not within your core jurisdiction, have a look around. Where are your links? Where's your business? And what might affect you as well from a compliance perspective.
Yeah, just to add on there, I think one of the things from a US perspective to understand, if you're not subject to those compliance requirements directly, I've talked with a lot of corporate leaders who are, you're just receiving more ESG questions from clients, pardon. And a lot of times those are actually driven by regulatory requirements that your clients are subject to. So it's important to understand not just your own regulatory situation, but your client's regulatory situation. Because if your client's coming to you and they're requesting something because they need it to comply with regulations, the client's going to have an urgency about that they will not have if it's just a nice to have. And you, as you're going into that discussion, you really need to know that driver behind, your clients' requests. So think through not just your own compliance, but your clients' compliance as well.